Hello everyone, my name is Nikhil. So in this video, we will discuss about the Next.js file based routing, that what it is, how it is different from the React routing, and why we need that if the React routing is already available. So let's start. So what is the file based routing? So the Next.js has a file system based router which is built on the concept of the pages. So when a file is added to the pages directory, so suppose you add a about page to your website, so you just need to add a about.js file and then you just write that component there. So you don't need to use that component anywhere inside that. So it is automatically be available as a route. So that is a file based routing. So the files inside the pages directory can be used to define the most common patterns. So the file based routing works with the files and not on the route paths as in the React.js, as we added the route, the element, and then we need to render that component there. And now no more path based routing inside the Next.js. So the Next.js has changed the concept of the path based routing. So here, although it was very good, but it can be a bit cumbersome. Like here you have the routes, then we add the route part equals to the blocks add my blocks. So it can be a bit cumbersome when you are building an enterprise level application. So there will be multiple routes that can look confusing in the end. So that's why the Next.js has introduced the file based structure for the routes. But how can we do that? So we just need to create the files as we do in the most basic HTML, and we just need to write the React code there, and in the end the Next.js will detect that this file is available and then it will automatically register that to the route. So it is same as the HTML navigation system in which we create pages for each route path. So now we will see an example. So here we have the pages and then we have the API, and the API folder is used to add the API for the backend inside the application. And then we have the books as we do in the HTML. We have the books, we have the index.js inside the books as the home page, and then we can have dynamic paths that we'll see later in this video, because now after this PPT we will learn about the file based routing and then we will just create a project based on that, and then it is same like the HTML. So now we will see the demo of this application that we are building. So here now you can see now we have different books onto the website. So now you can see now we have the localhost 3000 and then we have the books, and then now we are into the index.js of the books. But once we will move on to the detail page, now you can see now we can just dynamically move on to the detail page inside that. Now you can see now we have the ID as well there. So the dynamic routing is also available, and then we can just detail any book from there, and then you can see the ID of the book inside the URL as well. So now these are the dynamic routing inside that. So we will just create this project in the end after discussing about the file based routing inside the Next.js. So let's start. So please like the video and please subscribe to the channel as well, so I will be motivated to post the videos like this. So let's start building the application. And now I'm into the VS Code, and now we need to just create a new Next.js application in which we can demo the file based routing. So for that we need to just create a new Next.js application. So the command to create the new Next.js app will be the npx. It will be the create -next-app and then the name of the application which we want to create, like it can be my app. So then after that you need to just press enter, and the Next.js app will be then installed within very few moments. So just press enter, and now the app will be then installed within very few moments. And now the Next.js app is now installed, and now you can see we have the my app directory inside this file based routing. And now you can see the first folder that we have is the next, which is of no use as of now. And now you can see then we have the node modules folder which contains all of the packages which we need to use inside this Next.js app. And after that we have the pages folder, which is very important, which is available for the file based routing. So in the pages folder, the first folder that we have is the API folder. So what does the API folder does? So the API folder, so the files inside this API folder works on the server side and not on the client side. So in the API folder we can just create the API for the application, which will be available to use throughout this whole application inside that. And then as we all know that the Next.js app, we can have the backend and the front end same inside this single application. So we don't need to create another application for the backend or the front end. So the API folder is useful there. So inside this API folder we create the API for the application which we can call from the front end. And other than API, all of the folders are now exposed to the front end. So we have the index.js and then we have the app.js, and the app.js is the root component of all of the component pages here. And then we have the index.js, and now you can see in the index.js it is the home page of any HTML file which runs without adding any parameter to the URL. So it is the basic home page, and after that we can just create different files, and then we don't need to add any components here like in the React. Like in the React we add the routes, and then we have the different routes like the path and the elements. So here we don't need to add any route or anything. So we just need to create here the file, and then we can just run that file onto that browser, like the slash about slash it can be contact slash it can be products. So this is how the Next.js routing works. And now we can see the folders like public. So in the public folder, first thing that we have is the favicon.io, which is now available for the tabs. Like you can see inside these tabs, this icon will be then available inside the browser tabs. And then we have the versal.svg, which has the svg icon of the versal. And then we have the styles, and the first style that we have is the globals.css, which will be available globally throughout this application. So we don't need to import that, but the styles will be then available globally to all of these files. And then we have the home css, which is like a home page of the application, and it is now exposed to the index.js. And then we don't need anything from there, so we can just remove that. And then we can just remove this home.module.css file as well. And then after that we have the ESLint file, which just extends the capability and the quality of the code. And then we have the config files for the Next.js to run and build the Next.js applications. And then we have the package.json, contains the description of the application, like which dependencies we are using. Like we are using the next version of the 12, we are using the React 18 and the React DOM 18 as well. And then we have some more development dependencies as well. So this is the folder structure that we have discussed. And now let's again move into the pages folder that we have. So we have the API. So as we just discussed, that the API folder files runs on the server side and not on the client side. And other folders than the APIs, other than API, all of these folders are now available and exposed to the front end. Like we have the index.js, and then you can see we have some content inside the index.js. And then we can just remove everything from there because we need to start from the scratch. And after that we can just add here the div, and the div can contain a hello world. So after that everything is done, so we can just remove everything from the import statements as well. And after that we can just start the development server as well. So to start the development server inside this Next.js app, so we need to run the command as the npm run dev. So it will just start a local development server into our machine. So we can just press enter. So I think we are not into the my app directory, so we can just move on to the my app. And after that we can just add here the npm run dev. So this will start a development server on the localhost 3000. Like now you can see the application is now compiled and the server is now open. And now we can just open this localhost 3000. And now you can see now we have the hello world to the application. And now you can see as compared to the React, the Next.js is very fast in compiling and in building the application. So we can just use the Next.js for our next applications. And after that now you can see now we have the index.js file, which is serving the hello world. And after that if we just need to create a new file, like it can be about us page. So in the standard React we needed to just create a component like the about us, and then we need to just export that component. And then we needed to use this component inside the app.js or inside any parent component. But now in the Next.js we don't need to do that. We need to just create a file, and it can be about.js. And inside this about.js we can just create a function, like it can be a function as the about us. And after that we can just return something from there, like it can be a return as the h1, like it can be about us. And after that we can just create here the export statement, export default as the about us. And now we need to just save, and so we can just move on to the about us, like with the slash about. So we can just move on to the application. Like now you can see the index.js is serving the hello world. And if we just move on to the about, so now you can see now we have the about us page onto the applications. So this is as simple as this. So we just need to create a folder as the about.js, and then this folder will be then available inside the routes. And same like the HTML structures, as we learned the HTML, like how the routing works in the HTML, the same routing works inside the Next.js as well. And after that we can have the nested routes as well inside that. So for the nested routes, like now you can say we have the about us page. So for the about us page, as we have moved on to the about, so we can also create a folder as the about, and then we can just create the index.js page inside that. So I will not delete this from there. And if I will not just move on, and if I will not just create a folder, it would be the about. And inside the about, if I will not just create here the index.js, the home page of the about us page, and in the index.js now we can just create another function, like it can be a function, can be about us home page. And after that we can just create a component function, and inside that we can just return something, like we can return the JSX again, like it can be hello world, like it can be about us in the h1 tag. And after that we can just export this function as well, export default as the about us page. So if I will now just save, so everything would work same as before. So if I will now refresh the page, like now you can see the about us is still here, and then we can have some more nested routes as well inside that. So we can just create another, like it can be me, like it can be about me.js, and in the about me then we can just create another function, like it can be about me, and after that we can just export this as well, export default as the about me. So it would be the export, and inside this function, like we can just return the JSX again, like it can be about me, I am Nikhil Thadani. So this is the about me. So if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the application, refresh the application again, and then we have the about, and then if I will now just move on to the about/me, so now you can see, there's nothing on the web page, but now instead of this me, you need to add here the about me only. So it would be the about me, and if you will just rename this file to the from the about me to only the me, then it would work as the me only. Then you can see now we have the 404, and then we can just add here the me, and then this page would be then exposed to the front end. And then after the me, then we can just create another nested route as well, like inside this about we can just create another folder, like it can be a team, and it can be a team, and after the team we can just create the index.js inside this team as well. So the index.js inside this team will work same as before. So we can just create a component function again, like it can be a function, and it can be a about team, and in the about team then we will have the function here, and then we will just return that this can be a h1 tag again, and in the h1 it can be about team, and in the about team then we will have the export statement, export default as the about team. So now if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the browser once again, and now you can see after the about, then we can just add here the team as well. So in the about/team, now you can see we have the about team, and then we can just create another folder, like it can be a member.js, and inside the member now we can just have another function, and it can be a member, and inside this member then we will have another return statement, and it can be again the h1, like it can be a members in the team, and after that we can just export this function as well, export default as the member. So if I will now just save, if I will now move on to the application once again, so if I will now just move on to the team/member, so now you will see there will be the members in the team. So this is how the nested routes work inside this Next.js. So now we have covered the functionality, and we have covered the deep understanding of the nested routes. So we can just clear, and then we can just delete this about us page as well. So now after that, now we will just move on to the dynamic routes. And now we have deleted the about us page, because now we will move on to the dynamic routes. So for the dynamic routes, we can just create another folder inside the pages, and it can be a books. So we will see an example of the books inside that. So in the books, now we will just have here one more thing, like it can be index.js, and then inside the index.js now we will have another function, like it can be a function as the book home, and inside that now we can just have here the function, and inside that we can just return the books as well from there, like it can be a books homepage, and inside this book homepage now we can just have here the export default, and it can be a book home. So now if I will now just save, if I will now move on to the application, like now we don't need the about, it will be the books. So if I will now just save, so now you can see now we have the home page of the books as the index.js. And after that, if we want to see the dynamic routes, so in the books folder for creating the dynamic routes, we need to add here the square brackets .js, and inside the square brackets now we need to add the ID or anything which we want to see the information about this book. So like if we can just have a ID here, and then we can just save this, and inside this ID we can just create another function, like it can be a book detail, and then we can just create a function, like it can be a return h1, and it can be a book detail, and after that we can just export the default as the book detail. So now what it is doing, it will just create a dynamic route. So this route will work for any ID of the book that we want. So this route will work for any parameter after this books. So now this route will be working whenever we will just move on to the books slash anything, like we can have the ID, we can have the name of the book. So by default we will have the ID. So if I will now just save and if I will now just move on to the application, now you can see now we have the books and then we have the books homepage. But if we just move on and if we just add any other parameter after this books, like we can have the ID of the book, like we can have a B1. It's like if I will now just hit enter, and then you can see now we have the book detail page as well. And if we just move on to the B2 or B3 or any number of IDs that are available inside the books, so this page will work on all of that dynamic IDs. So this is how dynamic this page it is. So it will work on any number of IDs inside this books, like we can have B3, we can have B4, we can have B100, and then all of these books will be then available. And for all of the IDs, this page will be then available. So this page will handle all of these IDs after the books. So this is how the dynamic routing works inside this Next.js. And now after the dynamic routes, now we will see an example of the slug routing. So what does that mean? So it means that you can have as many parameters in the URL as you want. Like if I show you an example, like you can see this is at the guardian.com website, and now you can see they have the filter onto the blocks page. Like you can see they have the category as the technology, then they have the year, then they have the March, then they have the 09 at the September, and then they have the blocks. So this is a very big URL. So for that you can also create some dynamic routes, but it would be complex. So for that the Next.js has a solution to create this slug inside this URL as well. So we can just close that now. And now for that we can just create a slug as well. So for creating the slug, we can just move on and then we can just create another dynamic route, but it will be a slug file. So it can be a slug. So it can be a slug.js. So this will be the file name, and what this file name will do. So first we can just create a component, like it can be a slug. And after that we can just return something, like it can be a slug here, like we have the h1, and inside the h1 we have the slug page. And then we can just move on and then we can just export as well. With the export default, and it can be a slug. So if I will now just save and if I will now move on to the application, so now you will see the slugs here. So now we have the books and then we have the ID of the book, and this page will be then run from this file. And after that we can just move on and then we can just create another route inside that, like it can be a March, and then it can be a 09, and then it can be a year as the 2022, and then we can have the block as well. So now you can see this is very big route, but if you will just hit enter, so now you will see the slug page will be then open. So you can have as many number of parameters as you want inside the URL, and all of these parameter values. And if you have the big parameter values, then you can just move on to the slug page. Then you will automatically be moved on to the slug page inside that. So this is how the slug pages work. So you can have as many number of parameters as you want inside the URL, and then this slug page will be then working for all of the URLs. And now we have seen the examples of the static routes, the nested routes, the dynamic routes, and then we have also seen the multiple param routes. But now one thing is missing, like if you want to get the IDs of the parameters, so how we will do that in the Next.js. So now if I will now just move on to the id.js, which is the dynamic page, and then we need to just import something from the Next.js to get the value of that URL parameter as well. So like we need to just import something from the next, and it can be a router. So we need to import something from the next router, and it will be a useRouter. So we have the useRouter hook, and after that we can just move and we can just declare a variable, can be a router, and it will be equals to the useRouter hook. So now we have just declared a useRouter. So if you will just log what is inside the useRouter, so we can just log the router here. So if I will now just save and if I will now just move on to the book slash the ID of the book, like 1. So if I will now just move on to the inspect, move on to the console, like now you can see now we have some objects. If I will now just open the last object, and then you can see we have something inside this object. We have the path of the books as well, we have the routing path as well, like we have the books slash 1, and then we have all of the things, and then you have the path name as well, like you have the book slash ID, and then you have the push functions if you want to push to the routes, and then you have all of the things that you want. And the main thing that we have is the query. So the query object contains the ID which is available inside the URL. Now you can see now we have the ID as the 1, and if you will just have the ID as it can be anything like the 100. So now you can see now you will have the ID in the query as the 100. Like now you can see we have the ID as the 100. So this is how we can get the values of the routes as well inside the routing, and then we can just move on to the Slug.js to get the value here as well. We need to import again, so it will be import, and it can be the useRouter. From it can be the Next.js Next.router, so it would be then imported, and now we can just declare router, and it will be equals to the useRouter hook. And if you will just log this value of the useRouter, and then if you will just move on to the Slug routes, like you can say 100, like you can see the March, and then you can see the any number of value like the December and the year as well, 2021. So if I will now just save, so now you will see now we are in the Slug page, and now you will see interesting thing in the query. Like now you can see you have the array of the URL parameters in the query. Like now you can see the first is the 100, and then the second we have the March, and this third we have the 12, and then we have the fourth array which is the 2021. So this is how the Slug parameters work, and it is very helpful if you are building a blog page website. So you have the blocks, you have the filter on the URL as well. So this is very helpful if you have the filters on the web page. So this is how the routing works, and this is how we can get the parameters of the routing inside the Next.js. So now we have covered the routings, we have covered static routes, we have covered nested routes, we have covered dynamic routes, we have covered multiple routes with the parameters, we have covered Slug routes, and then we have also covered that how to get the values of the routes as well. So now we will see an example. So now we will just create an example project. It will be a mini project on the file based routing, which we will create inside the Next.js. So now let's start building that project. So now we can just start building that project. So now you can see now we have almost the same application. We have the books, and then we have the ID page, and now I have removed the Slug page from there because we don't need that. So we have the index.js, and then we have the dynamic id.js inside the books folder, and then we have nothing inside this home page as well in the index.js. So now we can just start building the data of that books. So now we can just create a folder inside the my app directory, and it can be a data, and then inside the data now we can just have a file, and it can be a utils.js, and then we can just create the data inside the utils. So we can just have a const, and it can be a books, and it will be equals to the array of the objects. So we can have the array of the objects. So we can have the ID, and the ID can be a 1, and then we can have the name of the book, and the name can be equals to the mindset, and then after that we can have description of the book as well, and the description can be this is my first book. And after that we can just copy this object multiple times. So we should have the 5 books onto the web page, so we can just copy this 4 times. So now we have the books. So now we can just change the ID. So this is the 2, and it can be the secret, and then we can just have the ID equals to the 3, and it can be the money, and then it can be the ID equals to the 4, and it can be atomic habits, and then we have the ID equals to the 5, and it can be the rich, dad, and a poor, dad. So now we have some books. So now we can just save, and then we can just use this books array into our books page. So now we can just move on to the books, and in the index.js now we need to import this books as well. So we can just import the books from the /utils. So we can just import /utils / we have the, I think we need to move on to the mod directory. So now we have the data /utils. So now we need to just export that data as well from there. We need to add the export const as the books, and after that we can just move on again to the index.js, and now we need to add the books. So now we have imported the books, and now inside the return page, and now I will now just add here the div. So it would be the div, and inside the div we will have the expression. So the expression will be data that we have. So it can be the books dot map. So now we will just map through all of the books. So it can be a book, and after that we can have the index of the each item of the book, and after that we can just declare a list of that. So we can just have here the div inside that, and inside that div we can have the key property, and the key property can be equals to the index, and after that we can just move on, and then we can just provide here the h1 tag. So we can have the h1, we can have the book dot name inside the h1, and after that we can just move on, and then we can just have a paragraph tag. So in the paragraph tag we will just have here the book dot, and it will be the description, and after that we will have here the link from the Next.js. So we can have the link. So for now it will be the article tag only. We can have article tag, and in the article tag then we will be having the link inside that. So now we will render the link later, but now we will just see all of the books onto that web page. So now we have just defined here the books.map, and then we will see every available book inside that. So now we can just define some style links as well. So now for now, if I will not just move on to the slash books, so now you will see there will be some books onto the web page. So now you can see you have the mindset, you have the description, you have the secret, you have the make money. Now you have all of the books onto that web page. And now you can just declare some styles as well. So you can just import the React as well from the React to add some styles inside that. So in the div, now you will be having some styles. So you will have the style. So we will just add here the styles in the inline only, because we don't need to add inside the CSS. So we can just have here the width of that. So the width can be equals to the 300 for now. And after that we can have the background. And the background can be equals to the white smoke. So now we have just defined the styles with the background, and then we can just have here the margin, and it can be equals to the auto. And for the display, I need the display as the flex, so we can have the display as the flex. And after that we can just have here the flex direction into the column. And after that now we will just have it justify to the content, and it can be into the center, because we want all of the items inside the center. We can just align the items as well inside the center. So if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the application, now you can see, and now we have just defined these styles. So now I know these styles are not looking good, but now the focus is on the routing. So this project is based on the routing and not on the styles. So now these styles will be okay. And now inside this link, then we will have some styles on the article tag as well. So we can have a style, and this style will contain some border, and it can be a 1 pixels, it can be a solid, it can be a black. And after that we can just add any style, like we can add a padding. It can have a padding as the 12. And after that we can just have a background, and the background can be #CCC. So if I will now just save, and if I will now just move on to the application, now you can see, now you will have the mindset, and then you can have and then you can have this is my first book, and then you can have the link, and then you can have the secret, you can have the make money, you can have the atomic habits, you can have rich dad poor dad. So now you have all of the books onto that web page. And now what you can do, you can just add here the link to move on to the ID page from there. So now from there, if you will just click any of the links, so we can just move on to the dynamic page, which is the ID. So for that we can just add here the link from the Next.js. So we need to import the link. So it can be import something from the Next.js, and it can be from the next/link. So we need to import the link. So I think the link is by default export, so we can just add here the link. So now we have imported the link, and inside that, instead of this link, so we can just use here the link only. And inside that link you can just have a ref prop for that. So you can have a ref, and in the ref you can just move on dynamically. So you can just have here the /books/ you will be having the ID of the books. So you will have the book that you have .id of the book. So now this is how you can just move on, and inside that you can just move on to the detail. You can just write here the detail. So if I will now just save, if I will now move on to the application, now you can see, now you have detail on all of the books inside that. So if you will just click the detail of the my first book, now you can see you are into the book detail, and the ID is equals to the 1. And if I will now just go back, if I will now move on to the secret, click on the detail, now you have again the book detail component, the ID equals to the 2. And same for every other route, and same for the every other books. So you can have the detail for the rich dad poor dad, the ID will be equals to the 5. So this is how we have just created the application. So this is how we can just create the dynamic routes inside this web page. And now we can just move on to the ID page, and then we can render something for the ID. So we can just have a functionality that we can just get the book from that ID in the URL. Like if I will now move on to the book/1, so we can just get the book from that ID. So for that we can just move on to the utils, and then we can just declare a new function here as the export. It will be the const, it will be the fetch book from the ID. So we can just have here the function, and this function will contain something in the arguments. So it will contain the ID as the parameter. So after that we will just return the books. So we can just have a const fetched book will be equals to, we have the array of the books. So we have the books dot, it would be the find method. So the find method will find a book from the database on a given condition. Like we can have a book as the parameter. So we can just have the condition like book dot ID will be equals to the ID that we have received in the parameter. So now we have just defined that, and after we will fetch the books, so we can just have here the return, and it can be a fetched book. So now we have just returned that. So now we can just move on again to the dynamic page, which is the index.js, and here we can just import that function as well from there. So we can just import that from, I think is available inside this data slash, it can be in the utils, and inside that we can just import that function as well. So it will be the fetch book from ID. So now we have imported that fetch book from ID function, and now we need to get this URL parameter as well for the ID. So for that, as we have discussed in the tutorial video, so we can just have the import, and we need to import the useRouter from the, it will be the next/router. So now we have imported the useRouter, and now we need to get the parameter ID as well. So we can have a const, and it will be equals to the query, and it will be equals to the useRouter. So now we are extracting the query from the useRouter. So now we can just have here the ID as well. So we can have a const book ID will be equals to the query dot the ID of the book. So now you need to make sure that this ID and this ID should be same. So if you are adding a book ID there, so you need to add the book ID. So the query will return the book ID. So now whatever name you will give to there, so it will be available inside that object. So now I have given only the ID, so it will be available as the ID. So now we have got the ID as well. So now we can just call that function as well to get the book from the ID. So we can have a const, it would be the book, and it will be equals to the fetch book from ID. So we can just have here the ID inside that. So for the ID we can just provide the book ID. So now we will get the book from there. So with that, now we will get the book from there. So now we have to render the book as well. So we can just move on again to the index.js that we have just created. So we can just copy the div style from there. So we can just copy that inside div. So we can just copy, and then we can just move on to the id.js, and then we can just paste instead of the h1. So now we have just given that. So now we need to import the React from the React as well. So do the React from the React, and after that you need to remove the article tag, because now we don't need the ID, because now we don't need the link. So now we have the book.name, we have the book.description, and now you have everything of the book as well. So now what we are doing inside the book detail function, so we have the const query, and we have the router here, and then you can have the book ID, you can have the query.id, and then you can have the book as well from the fetched book from that ID. So it will get you the book from there, and after that you are now rendering the book. So if I will now just save, if I will now move on to the application, so now you will see an error. So now if I will now just refresh the page, I think now you can see the name is undefined, and now you can see the book is also undefined. So if you will just log the value of the book as well, for book, so now you will see the book is also undefined. So if you will just inspect, if you will just move on to the console, you can refresh the page. Like now you can see the book will be undefined, and now you can see uncaught error as well from the book. And it is happening because we also have the React as well inside this application, because the Next.js work on the top of the React. So for that the functionality is same as per the React. So for that we can just have here the condition as well. So we can have the condition like if we don't have the book, so then we will just return the paragraph tag only. So it can be a loading. So whenever the rendering will be done, so whenever the first render is done, so we will just have here the condition like when we don't have the book, we need to just return the paragraph tag as the loading, and when we will having the book, so we will just return this div. So if I will now just move on to the application, we can just refresh. I think the index is not defined. I think we don't need that index as well from there. So we don't need that key. And now if I will now just save, if I will now move on to the application, now you can see now we are getting the book, and now you are getting the book inside the inspect as well. If you will just move on to the console, you are getting the book as well from there. Like you can see there's a description, this is my first book, you have the ID of that book, you have the name of that book, and everything of that which are available inside the data. So you can just fetch anything from the database as well from there, and after that you can have all of the books from there. So if you will just detail the secret as well, now you can see you have the secret onto the web page. If you will just have here the detail of the atomic habits, so you can just have the detail as well, and after that everything is working perfectly fine. So now we have just completed the project of the dynamic routing inside the Next.js, And in this project, you have learned about the dynamic routing and how we can just move on to the different routes and how to use the router variables inside the next router and how to move on to the different route with the link inside the router. So now we have just completed this application. And the styles of this completed application is not good, I know, because we are just only focusing on the routing page, that how to work on the dynamic routes and not on the styling. Now we have covered the mini project with the file based routing inside the Next.js. So now let's see the summary of what we have built. So we have just learned about the static routes, we have learned about the nested routes, and we have learned about the dynamic routes, and we have also learned about the slug routes. So now we have learned everything about the file based routing, and then we have also created the project as the bookstore application with the routing. So now we have covered the file based routing inside this video. So that's all for this video. So thank you for watching the video, and I hope you will like the video as well, and please subscribe to the channel as well, so I will be motivated to post the videos like this every time. So thank you.